We were 4 hours off Halcourt's reach when the board lit up, and I almost let it go to voicemail the way you let a wrong number ring out. That is not a joke I would have made at the time. At the time I was running a patrol rotation along a sector nobody in Fleet Command cared about. 3 ships doing slow circles around a scatter of colonies that had stopped mattering to anyone but themselves. Halcourt's reach was one of them. I knew it the way you know a name on a supply manifest. A breakaway world. A colony that had split from its parent government 2 generations back, in a war nobody outside the sector remembered the shape of, and never got put back together. The old maps still called the whole cluster the Kest Compact. Nobody living called it that. They called it the Reach, and the Ascendancy, and whatever else they were calling each other, while they shelled one another's harvest towns. The signal that came in was not addressed to us. That was the first thing the comms officer told me, half apologetic, like she'd caught someone else's mail. It was writing a beacon protocol so old the ship's library had to dig for the header. A mutual aid channel, pre-split, guarantor clause, the kind of thing written into a peace treaty by people who assumed the peace would last. It hadn't. But the channel had never been decommissioned, because decommissioning it would have meant admitting the treaty was dead, and nobody wanted to be the one who signed that. So when someone on Halcourt's Reach hit the panic switch during the 3rd bombardment wave of the day, it did not go where they thought it was going. It went into a monitoring relay Earth had inherited by accident, and kept staffed out of the kind of stubbornness that doesn't get written into procurement budgets. And from there, because I happened to be the closest hull with a working engine, it came to me. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it wasn't heroic. I looked at the fuel curve, I looked at my patrol orders, and I broke off course without asking anyone's permission, because asking would have taken longer than the answer was worth, and because there is a kind of decision you make faster than you can justify it. My navigator asked, reasonably, whether we had any legal standing to intervene in what was plainly somebody else's civil war. I told her the beacon had answered a treaty we were still bound to honor, which was true in the narrowest possible reading of the word bound, and left it there. She logged the course change without further comment, which is the closest thing to permission a patrol officer usually gets. I logged the diversion as an emergency response to a distress beacon of unconfirmed origin. That was true. It was also not the whole of it. We came in low over the Reach's main settlement under a sky the color of a bruise, and I understood inside of 10 seconds why nobody had bothered decommissioning that old channel. The bombardment wasn't a battle. It was a schedule. 3 strikes a day, the harbor pilot told us later, time to hit while people were moving between shelters, because that was when it did the most damage for the least ordnance spent. The Ascendancy wasn't trying to win anymore. They were trying to make losing cost as much as possible before somebody, anybody, made them stop. The landing field was already burning when we dropped through the cloud layer. Not all of it. The western apron, where the relay station sat, had taken a glancing hit from the second wave, and the fires hadn't caught the fuel stores yet, but they would, and there was a 3rd wave coming, the same one that had launched the panic signal in the first place. We were 1 corvette. I want that on the record plainly, because there is a version of this story where a fleet arrives and the math works out clean, and that is not what happened. I had the Thresher, and 41 crew, and whatever ordnance we'd been carrying for a routine patrol, nobody expected to see combat. Against that came 6 strike craft on their final run. We took 2 of them down before they reached their release point. I will not pretend that was skill so much as the strike craft not expecting anything to be in that sky at all. Earth had no treaty obligation here, no listed presence, nothing on any ascendancy chart that would have told them to look up. The other 4 broke off. Whether that was caution or orders I never learned. What I do know is that the 3rd wave's release pattern hit 2 blocks short of where it had hit the day before, and I have spent enough nights since telling myself that those 2 blocks mattered to believe it, even if I can't prove it. It cost us. The Thresher took a glancing strike across the port drive that put us dead in the water on the apron for 6 hours, while my engineer swore at a coolant line, and I lost 2 of my crew doing atmospheric intercept in a hull that was never built for it. I am not going to write their names here. That is not what this is for. I found the woman who'd pressed the switch sitting against the relay station's outer wall, still in her work coveralls, a comm headset dangling from one hand, like she'd forgotten she was holding it. Her name was Ausen Kelvaro, and she ran the field's civilian relay on a rotation that had nothing to do with any military chain of command. She was there because someone had to be, and on that day it was her. She looked at the thresher sitting scorched and grounded on her apron, and she looked at me in a suit that didn't match anything in her sector's identification charts, and she said the thing I have turned over in my head more times than I'd like to admit. I didn't call you. I told her I knew that. I called the militia relay, she said. There is no militia relay. There hasn't been one in 9 years. I hit the switch because it was the only switch left on that panel, and I didn't think anything would answer it. I didn't have a clean way to explain the guarantor clause to her, the old channel, the accident of inheritance that put my ship in her sky, instead of leaving it silent the way it had been for 2 generations. So I told her the true, small version of it, that somebody a long time ago had wired a promise into a piece of hardware and never gotten around to unwiring it, and that the promise had come due on a day nobody meant it to. She listened to that the way you listen to something you already suspected and didn't want confirmed. Not relief, not gratitude, not the kind you'd put on a recruitment reel. Just a long, quiet look at the smoke over the harbor, and then back at the wall we hadn't managed to save. You lost people, she said. It wasn't a question. 2, I said. For a switch I didn't mean to hit. I told her that wasn't how debts worked, that a signal doesn't care what you meant when you sent it, only where it lands. She didn't argue with that. She didn't thank me for it either. What she did was walk me down the scorched apron to where the shelter rows had held, past the ones that hadn't, and she introduced me to the people who were still there to be introduced, because that was the thing she could do with the hours she had left before the next wave was due, and she did it without hurry, like a woman filing a report she intended to be accurate. We stayed 11 days, until the drive was fixed, and the Ascendancy's strike pattern had shifted somewhere the old channel couldn't reach. My engineer rebuilt the coolant line twice, the second time properly, using parts scavenged from a wrecked strike craft that had gone down half a kilometer from the apron. There was something in that I didn't examine too closely, repairing a human hull with the bones of the thing that had holed it. Austin kept the relay staffed the whole time, out of habit more than need, because the switch that had started all of it was still bolted to her panel, and she had not yet decided what to do about that. I asked her once if she meant to disconnect it. She said no. She said a switch that worked, even by accident, was worth more to her than one that didn't, and I didn't have an answer for that either. I filed the incident as a diversion under an inherited treaty obligation, category, mutual aid, guarantor, unconfirmed prior activation. Fleet Command's response took 3 weeks, and amounted to a note that the channel would be formally reviewed. It has not, to my knowledge, been decommissioned. Austin sent one message before we broke orbit, routed correctly this time, addressed to the thresher by name, instead of to whatever ghost of a militia she'd been hoping for. It said only that the switch was still there, still wired the same way, and that she hoped nobody ever needed to find that out again. I hope so too. I have not deleted the frequency from our comm library. I don't expect I ever will.